Hi booktube, Aaron here, hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to do a bit of a random reading update. I suppose it's really a mid-month check-in for my reading, since I've finished a few books since the beginning of September. So the sort of roadmap for this video is I'll start off with the 6 books that I've finished so far this month, mostly quite short, so somewhat in the spirit of Shorty September, even if I'm not really reading books that quite fit into the prompts, but I'm certainly reading a little bit in the spirit of Shorty September, and then I'll go into what I'm reading at the moment and some of the things that might keep me busy for the rest of September. So starting off then, so I think the first 3 books were books that I finished when on holiday at the very beginning of the month, and the first one, maybe one of the driest, but I thought very good, was this guide to Ezra Pound's Cantos by George Kearns, and I found it just a really helpful introduction to the cantos. It gave me a grounding of how the poem works as a whole and what to expect, maybe what some limitations of it might have been. So yeah, it was good. It was good to get an idea of what's been going on in there. He goes into some specific characters from history, some specific people who were important, whether they're people who are named in the cantos or whether, in the case of, I'm going to get his name here so I don't forget it, Fenellosa, someone whose sort of spirit hovers over the thing. Fenellosa was a scholar of Chinese and Japanese literature, and when he died, his widow gave Ezra Pound his notebooks, and Ezra Pound, as I understand it, basically learnt Chinese from his notebooks and carried on his translations, and I think Fenellosa had quite an odd, idiosyncratic understanding of how Chinese works, and that certainly bled over into Ezra Pound's thinking of Chinese. But he was a very important figure to Pound, and then the Chinese language and Chinese sort of classical Chinese literature and thought is all over the cantos as well. So yeah, it gives you those kinds of contexts, and then at the very end it just goes straight into Pound and politics and his support of Mussolini and his missteps, as it were. So I'd recommend something like this if you were planning or sort of toying with the idea of trying to read Ezra Pound's cantos, and then it might help you make a decision, might help you get a good idea of what you're in for, or you can just read the Wikipedia page. I suppose that might do a good job as well. Next up, we've got Dante Alighieri. We've got Vita Nuova. It's the Anthony Mortimer translation, and this is a kind of it's almost like a creative writing portfolio where Dante has pieced together some poems from a certain period in his life, and then there's a prose narrative sort of knitting them together, explaining the story behind the poems, how he came to write them, and kind of what he means as well. And it's about his infatuation with Beatrice, who he first sees when he's very young, just a child, and yeah, that infatuation carries on into adulthood and beyond her death, and she would eventually, make it into the Divine Comedy, and she'd be up there in paradise, looking out for him. And so it is it is that kind of love story, that story of obsession. It's also the story of a poet kind of coming into their own voice. To begin with, his approach to writing love poetry is to essentially write about the effect that his love has on him, and then he sort of realizes that's not really appropriate, and it's doing the beloved object a disservice, and so he instead sort of develops this style that's more in praise of the beloved object. So I think so some people read it as a kind of religious allegory, but it's also just a fascinating look into his development of his development as a poet and on his philosophy of love, which was kind of different to other poets around him. Like Cavalcanti had a very different idea of what love was like. And then you also just get a nice look at the culture of poetry in Florence at the time, the way that sonneteers would write their sonnets and pass them around, and people would respond to them, and you get a little glimpse into that kind of thing as well. So I thought it was really, really delightful, and I'll certainly be coming back to it again. I'll probably come back to it before I read the Divine Comedy next, whenever that is. Not planning another read of it anytime soon. Then the third book, is this one, what does it fit into Shorty September? No, it's about 30 pages too long for Shorty September. I think Vita Nuova was too long as well. But this is still very short. It's Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. This is translated by William Weaver. And this is just a really, really lovely book. I was really surprised at how engrossing it would be. It was one of those books where, for as short as it is, it has, at least on the back, it seems to have quite a simple premise, and so I was wondering whether it would get really repetitive and a bit boring, but I found it really, really fascinating. And so essentially, the basic premise is that it's Marco Polo and Kubla Khan both sat in conversation, and Kubla Khan has asked Marco Polo to describe all the cities that he's gone and visited, and so you have these really strange, dreamlike descriptions of these cities, which don't seem real, or they seem exaggerated, or they seem like a symbol for something. And then it sort of goes into why that is, and sort of eventually we find out. It's relatively soon. It's not that far into the book that you find out that every city that Marco Polo is describing is really Venice, and on the back it sort of tells you that, and I was wondering, will that be it? But then it sort of goes a few steps deeper than that, because then it goes into how if you're ever telling anyone anything, if I want to talk about a city, then really my home city, or my own idea of what a city is based on my own experience, however different the other city I'm going to describe is, it's inevitably going to be based and drawn from my original experience, if that makes any sense. And so for Marco Polo, every city that he describes is Venice, because he's building his descriptions out of what he knows of Venice. And so even though reading it, you're like, well, this isn't Venice in its entirety, but it's maybe a little piece of it. And Marco Polo then becomes very reticent to describe Venice in a total way, because he fears he might lose it if he tries to encapsulate it. And so this sort of piecemeal, little bitty approach seems to be the best way for him to describe it, but also describe pretty much everything else. And then it sort of goes on from there, yet another step deeper in, because then Kubla Khan starts asking, he says, I will describe a city and you will tell me if you've ever visited it, as to whether this city really exists. And he'll describe a city in the vein of Marco Polo with these weird stories that he's been telling, and Marco Polo will be like, yes, that is a real city, it does exist, for the same reasons that every city that he had described was Venice, because he immediately recognises things that, and so it's sort of all about how we tell things and how we understand things sort of based on ourselves, and I found it really, really lovely, because Calvino he's one of those writers where I'm always entertained by him, and I'm always kind of thrilled by him. I'm never exactly sure what I'm going to get into with each of his books. This is the first of his books where, upon finishing it, I found it to be beautiful, whereas the rest were interesting and fun, and however else you'd like to describe it. But I found this beautiful, and part of it is just the cities being described, but then the idea of it itself becomes quite beautiful as well. So I thought I'd read just one of the cities that is maybe quite a nice, in a way it kind of encapsulates what's going on with a lot of this. So this is Cities in the Sky, number 3. Those who arrive at Thekla can see little of the city, beyond the plank fences, the sackcloth screens, the scaffoldings, the metal armatures, the wooden catwalks hanging from ropes or supported by sawhorses, the ladders, the trestles. If you ask, why is Thekla's construction taking such a long time? The inhabitants continue hoisting sacks, lowering leaded strings, moving long brushes up and down, as they answer, so that its destruction cannot begin. And if asked whether they fear that, once the scaffoldings are removed, the city may begin to crumble and fall into pieces, they add hastily, in a whisper, not only the city. If, dissatisfied with the answers, someone puts his eye to a crack in a fence, he sees cranes pulling up other cranes, scaffoldings that embrace other scaffoldings, beams that prop up other beams. What meaning does your construction have, he asks. What is the aim of a city under construction, unless it is a city? Where is the plan you are following, the blueprint? We will show you it. We will show it to you as soon as the working day is over. We cannot interrupt our work now, they answer. Work stops at sunset. Darkness falls over the building sites. The sky is filled with stars. There is the blueprint, they say. So yeah, that's a taste of Invisible Cities. I really, really loved it, and again, it's something I can see myself coming back to time and time again. Next up, these are 2 books that I picked up when I was on holiday, and I kind of run out of short books I could sort of take out with me on day trips while I was out and about. The other books I was reading were really chunky and I didn't want to take them with me. So I started reading these, and the first of them is the collected poems and selected prose of Charlotte Mew. This is edited and with an introduction by Val Warner. On the whole, I much preferred her poetry to her to her prose. The prose in here consists of a few short stories, an essay and a play. Sort of many of them quite domestic, and yeah, I don't know, they just didn't grab me this time round. The poetry, it feels very late Victorian, but at times it's quite scandalous and unexpected, I suppose, in what it's saying. So I can see on the back it says that, there's a whole list of people who loved Charlotte Mew's poetry, So it has Siegfried Sassoon, Ezra Pound, Virginia Woolf, Dylan Thomas, and Thomas Hardy, all names, all people that loved her poetry. And I mean, definitely with Thomas Hardy, it's got that sort of melancholy, sort of wistful voice, I suppose, to it. And certainly then with Virginia Woolf and Ezra Pound, I can certainly see how they would both enjoy it. With, I think, for Ezra Pound, a lot of the poems in here are sort of dramatic monologues, rather quite modest, everyday dramatic monologues. Quite a few of them from more working class people, and so I can kind of see why they stood out to Ezra Pound in that way. And I can also see why Virginia Woolf would like them. That there are some of the monologues are a little more extended, and particularly one, if I can find the title of it. Just give me one moment. Let's have a look. Which one was it? It might be La Sacre Coeur. It's one of the. It's a poem set in a church, and yeah, it's quite long, and it's describing presumably a young woman, just adding up her life and what she thinks. Yeah, I don't think it's Sacre Coeur. Sacre Coeur is too short. It looks like this one. Let's have a look. Yeah, Madeline in a church. I'll just read the beginning to give you a sense of the tone of the poem. Here, in the darkness, where this plaster saint stands nearer than God stands to our distress, and one small candle shines, but not too faint, as the far lights of everlastingness, I'd rather kneel than over there, in open day where Christ is hanging, rather pray to something more like my own clay, not too divine. For once, perhaps, my little saint, before he got his niche and crown, had one short stroll about the town. It brings him closer, just that taint, and anyone can wash the paints off our poor faces, his and mine. So it's, you know, a very human thing. Someone, you know, going to church for some kind of consolation, but don't want to necessarily go straight to God and to what's expected, but instead is looking at this saint in the niche, and that seeming a bit more approachable. And then it goes into her everyday life, and the very obvious rhyme scheme that you could probably pick up on there sort of comes in and out. It becomes very loose, rhymed free verse, kind of like T.S. Eliot, like early T.S. Eliot. As she's sort of trying to work this out and trying to work out where she can find consolation, I suppose. So this is a poem that I'll be coming back to, because it has this very, very, very real psychology to it, and this sort of toing and froing, which kind of reminded me a bit of Virginia Woolf. So yeah, I was surprised by a fair bit of it, as a sort of selection of her work on the whole. I don't know, I found it a bit middling. I kind of wish we just had the poems, so I could just focus on them, because as a book as a whole, yeah, I just didn't enjoy the prose quite so much. So that was Charlotte Mew and her collected poems and selected prose. And then the next two. So the next one is, again, one that I picked up while on holiday. And this is Margaret Oliphant, A Beleaguered City and Other Stories. And this is, I think, 5 sort of supernatural stories. Something she wasn't really... she isn't really known for, but she would do from time to time when she felt like it, basically. And it was a bit of a mix. I would say there are, yeah, really two of the stories I really liked. One of them was okay, and two of them I didn't particularly like. One of the ones I didn't particularly like was A Beleaguered City, the sort of title story. It was more of a novella about a small town in France where this sort of strange mist and darkness descends on the city, and essentially the dead, although they can't really quite be seen, but kind of sensed by some characters, but the dead take over the city, and the living are expelled from the city, and it's all about, you know, why they've been expelled and what they can do to get their city back. And I just found the story a bit overblown and a bit overwritten. It could have been at least half as short, half as long as it was. But then the next story, The Open Door, was much better. I think maybe because she was on home turf again. That first story is set in France, and she's sort of over-exaggerating the character's Frenchness. Whereas she was from Scotland, and the next story, The Open Door, is set in Scotland. And I think that was much more successful, much creepier, much more arresting, and just better paced. And so, yeah, it was a bit of a tug of war with Margaret Oliphant. Sometimes she was amazing, and sometimes she just overwrite things a bit. Because then the next story, Old Lady Mary, again, was just a bit too overwritten, about an old woman who dies, but she's not finished her, well, I think she has finished her will, but she's left it somewhere where no one will find it. And yeah, it's sort of about her family moving on and things maybe not going as she'd hoped they would. And so yeah, that was it was interesting, but again, just overwritten and way too long for what it was. And then the next story, which was The Land of Darkness, essentially about someone in hell, and about a very particular vision of what hell might be like. One of the longer ones, but again, just much more arresting. I thought I found it much more interesting. And then The Library Window, which was okay, but even though it was one of the shorter ones, I don't know, it just fell a little bit flat for me. And so a bit of a mix, really. There was some really good stuff in there. I think part of what was really interesting, really in most of the stories, was she kind of reflects on why there was this need for supernatural stories and for ghost stories, and sort of turns towards spiritualism and stuff like that in the 19th century, and really that being grief and loss, and there's always a little bit of grief and loss in these ghost stories, and they sort of tinge everything, and so I did find that really interesting as I was going through. So yeah, a bit of a mix, but I've got 3 other Margaret Oliphant books to read, but I'm also conscious that she didn't always write ghost stories, so her other stuff might be quite different. And then the last book that I finished quite recently, was The Man of 50 by Goethe. This is translated by, will it tell us? It will tell us somewhere. Translated by Andrew Piper, and this is basically a sort of longish short story or a novella about some really weird family dynamics. It's essentially a man who, he's 50 years old. His son is coming of age, and if I'm remembering correctly, his sister is a widow, and so he's doing his best to make sure that his own estate and her estate are going to be kept in good hands. And the plan that they've come up with is that his son will marry his sister's daughter, and then there's a bit of a snag in it. One is that the sister's daughter is in love with someone else, and also then the son is in love with someone else. So it's not really going to work, at least initially. And the kind of outrageous thing is that the man that this man's niece is in love with is him, which is, it's a bit weird. A young girl of, probably in her late teens, infatuated by her middle-aged uncle. So a bit of an odd story, and then he's like, okay, well that still solves the problem. I can marry her, and then the estates will still be kept together. I just have to break the bad news to my son. And so then he's thinking that, well, now I have to look younger and stuff like that. So it sort of goes into him trying to appear youthful. And then he meets the woman that his son is in love with, and she's also attracted to him. It's just a bit of a crazy and very odd story. Incredibly ironic, quite entertaining in how it's told, and relatively open-ended and not too heavy-handed in how it ended at the end. I was quite surprised by that. It felt like a much more recent story than what it was. I thought it was a nice, quite a breezy, quite a fun way to get to know Goethe. This is the first thing that I've read by him, and I'm hoping to read Faust in about a month or two. So we'll see how that goes. And I think there might be a slight tonal difference between The Man of 50 and Faust. I enjoyed it, and I appreciated the irony. I definitely got shades of Thomas Mann in there, and Death in Venice and stuff like that. And then on to the ongoing things. So I'm currently still making my way through T.S. Eliot and his complete poems and plays. In August, I finished off the complete poems, and so now I'm making my way through the plays, planning to read maybe a play or two every month until the end of the year. Just the other day, I read Murder in the Cathedral, which I'd read before, and I really, really enjoyed it. Found it, I think each time I come to it, I find it more interesting. And what I liked with Murder in the Cathedral, if I can find it, was that it felt like a kind of bridging point between Eliot in The Wasteland and Eliot in Four Quartets. And there's this whole very dusty sort of Anglican period sort of between The Wasteland and Four Quartets. I mean, and some of the poems are great. There's Ash Wednesday, which I love. I think it's really the choruses from The Rock that are just really overblown and just very dusty. And what's fascinating with Murder in the Cathedral, I think he sort of wrote Murder in the Cathedral, I think just after writing the choruses to The Rock, and then he'd go on to write Four Quartets, and then after writing Four Quartets, he'd focus on the rest of his dramatic career. I think that's the rough chronology of what was going on. And I just love that he's drawn to Christianity and to the history of Christianity and to religious language. And so taking the subject matter of the death of Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral just works perfectly, because he can just go straight into that and it doesn't feel out of place. And he manages to balance it with sort of some straighter, more plain language and some more general sort of philosophical musings as well. And so it doesn't feel quite as antiquated as The Rock, even though it's set in the Middle Ages. And what I really loved was how I could still sort of hear traces of the wasteland in the first few lines of the play. So this is what the chorus say to open the play. Here let us stand, close by the cathedral. Here let us wait. Are we drawn by danger? Is it the knowledge of safety that draws our feet towards the cathedral? What danger can be for us, the poor women of Canterbury? What tribulation with which we are not already... what tribulation with which we are not already familiar? There is no danger for us, and there is no safety in the cathedral. Some presage of an act which our eyes are compelled to witness has forced our feet towards the cathedral. We are forced to bear witness. Since golden October declined into sombre November, and the apples were gathered and stored, and the land became brown, sharp points of death in a waste of water and mud, the new year waits, breathes, waits, whispers in darkness. While the labourer kicks off a muddy boot and stretches his hand to the fire, the new year waits. Destiny waits for the coming. Who has stretched out his hand to the fire and remembered the saints at All Hallows, remembered the martyrs and saints who wait? And who shall stretch out his hand to the fire and deny his master? Who shall be warm by the fire and deny his master? So it's sort of setting up a bit of what's going on between the king and Beckett there, but also just that imagery of the brown sharp points of death in a waste of water and mud, and this sense of a turning towards the new year as well. So Beckett was murdered, I think on the 29th of December, so just before the new year, and it seems to be suggest that he's almost like an offering to sort of bring the year out of darkness into light again, into the new year. And so yeah, I enjoyed it again, and there's this odd bit towards the end once Beckett's been killed, where the knights justify themselves, and again, I really love it. It reminds me of the courtroom in the Brothers Karamazov, and the way in which you're asked to just completely rethink everything that you've just read, and even if you don't necessarily agree with what's being said in the moment, it at least allows you that reflection and allows for multiple points of view. So yeah, I really loved it, and I'll probably go on to the next one, which is the family reunion, which I think, if I'm remembering correctly from stuff I've read about it, is kind of, well, like Murder in the Cathedral, it's kind of modelled on a like a Greek tragedy, really, and I think it even even features the Eumenides. So we'll see how that goes. And then very quickly, as I already mentioned, I'm still reading the Cantos with Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. I've just finished, which section is it? Is it 11 new cantos, I think? And it's one of the shorter sections, I think less than 100. Yeah, it's about 50 pages or so. But it's sort of just entrenching what he's been saying so far, just more and more. But yeah, I'm enjoying it, and I'll probably make some dedicated videos about the cantos at some point. And then sort of more currently reading. I'm currently reading the selected poems of Adonis. This is translated by Khaled Mattawa, and it's just brilliant. I've been really enjoying his poetry. It's very arresting, very visceral, and often a little surreal or kind of impressionistic, and kind of like these yeah, kind of impressionistic collages, and they sort of just build up throughout the poem. So yeah, I'm very much enjoying the poetry of Adonis. And then that leaves us to one more book, which will keep me busy, I think, through September. And this is yet another buddy read with Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. And we're going to read The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I've read The Secret History and enjoyed it. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what this is like. It's quite a chunky looking hardcover, but it is only about 600 pages, I think. Oh, okay. It's 771 pages, so it's just shy of 800 pages. But I think it will keep me busy in the last couple of weeks of September, maybe take me through to the beginning of October. But we'll see how that goes. So that's The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. And that's everything. That's everything I'm reading at the moment. So at the moment, until I start The Goldfinch, I'll be starting tomorrow. It's basically just poetry that I'm reading at the moment, which is lovely, and it's quite refreshing. And then I think I'll feel quite charged up and ready to go with fiction again by the time I'm starting The Goldfinch tomorrow. So I'll leave it there. Again, it's been a bit of a rambly one. I'm finding it hard to keep the length down on these update videos and these wrap-ups. So hopefully that was understandable and entertaining in its own way. And let me know if you've read any of these, or if you're interested in any of these, or if you have any strong opinions. So for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.